Welcome to the Speckled Truth podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the Speckled Truth podcast. This week I have a very special guest, Captain Kyle Johnson. Kyle, for those of you who don't know, is a pretty critical figure in Speckled Truth, being a brand as well as a movement. But I don't want to steal too much of his thunder. KJ, what's up, brother?
What's going on, Chris?
How you doing, big dog?
Doing pretty good, man. How about you?
Good, man. Thanks for joining us, man, and obviously getting together. This has been a long time coming, right, bro?
Yeah, definitely, man.
I know it's, when we first started this thing, I mean, it went from just a simple blog, and over the course of the time that we've kind of been involved with Speckled Truth, how much it's actually grown. And now the fact that can call ourselves and actually have a podcast is actually pretty awesome, dude. So none of this happens without you. And I want our viewers to know that as well. But I don't want to get too far into it because we're going to discuss a little bit more about that here as we go forward. But before we do, go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Kyle Johnson, married to Courtney, now Johnson, used to be Courtney Brown. We got two kids. We got a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. And, man, I'm just a family man. And I devote a lot of my spare time to conserving the fisheries and chartering. And now it seems like fishing for myself is kind of on the back burner, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and so, again, for those who really don't know, Kyle he's gotten his Coast Guard captain's license. He's now started his own charter captain license there on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and that's where you're from. Are you from there, born and raised there? Or?
Born and raised in Gulfport. After Hurricane Katrina, which, anybody from the coast,
right.
That's a very monumental time in your timeline living on the coast.
Right.
I did some commercial construction. I helped rebuild the Bay Bridge, the Bay St. Louis Bridge. And then shortly after that, I joined the Mississippi Army National Guard, where I started working full-time as an avionics technician on UH-60 Blackhawks, OH-58s, which are no longer in service, 47 Chinooks. And I love it, man. I really do. But I'm just kind of ready for that next chapter in my life. Yeah. And it feels like guiding is the what I want to do. It feels like everything's been kind of pushing me towards that. And I've kind of been fighting it for a couple of years, honestly. But I've just kind of got past the fear of not having that guaranteed paycheck and realizing that I have to make my own paycheck. It's all, I'm holding myself accountable, I guess you could say.
And so I actually don't even know this, dude. How long have you actually been in the service?
So I joined in 2009. So in 4 months, it will be 11 years.
Oh my God. Dude. So as a dude who's in near 15 years, I know we talk about this a lot, man. And so, the military and the government makes it very easy for you to live a comfortable life to some extent. Right. But on the same token as you're obviously at the whim of really whatever is going on. And unlike me, you're really more at the whim of the governor, right? As a guardsman.
Yeah. And it's changed a lot. The National Guard, as far as I'm concerned, it's not really what it was intended to be. So when I first joined and when I first started signing up and looking into it, because as well as anybody, I'm one of those guys that does way too much research before doing anything. I don't jump into anything. So I was kind of the understanding that, the National Guard helped with, national emergencies, hurricanes and things like that. And man, it's really shifted a lot. We support active duty, and so we relieve them overseas. So, my unit, when I first got in, which deploying wasn't, when I joined, I was like, okay, I'm going to deploy. I know that's going to happen. So I mentally prepared myself for that,
Yeah.
which I haven't had to yet, which is crazy, 10 years and I haven't deployed, just luck of the draw, I guess. But,
Yep.
Our unit deploys every 3 years now. So it's almost like active duty. I know active duty deploys a lot more. I'm not taking anything away from them,
Sure.
but I feel like the Guard has really changed a lot since I got in, and it's not really everything I kind of thought it was going to be, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, I definitely know what you're talking about, especially from a deployment side. Yeah, we do deploy. I've deployed a couple of times myself, and most recently in 15. And there's definitely a sacrifice, man. And so, but I know we've talked ad nauseum, dude, about, being in the military and everything else, and that being a cornerstone of our life and what we do. And so I talk to you about this all the time, man. And that is, you're taking the leap of faith that I think maybe I'm probably too scared to do, man. And so, but knowing you and knowing you for some time now, and the amount of passion you have for the fishery, not only that, but then the amount of passion you have for serving people, that I think from your military service transcends so perfectly, dude, to what you're getting ready to encounter with your charter business. And I have no doubt, dude, you'll be incredibly successful. But I wanted to ask you, dude, so like, when, I don't know, I mean, growing up fishing on a coast, was there a moment, maybe it was recently, maybe it was really, really young in your life, that you were like, you know what, dude, I want to fish for the rest of my life. Like, I wanted to make that my livelihood. Was there a certain moment that stood out to you that happened?
There's no really defining moment of that. I just, we're something draws us to the water. Everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. Even if you've never been out on the water,
Sure.
you have some underlining, like, subconscious thing telling you to get out on the water. And you start feeding that, and it starts making you think differently. And, I've thought about guiding full time before. I would say it was probably back in like 2015, 2016. I really kicked around the idea a little bit. And I think we're going to get into this more a little bit later in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But when my mindset changed as a fisherman, it made me realize that guiding actually is something that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started kicking around the idea, and I do this, man, I write down pros and cons. I have to physically see pros and cons on a piece of paper before I make a very important decision. Even sometimes not even really that important decisions, like arguing with your wife or something like that. I gotta write down some pros and cons and kind of see it. And that just, there was a lot more cons back then. And then, as well as a lot of my close friends, the past couple years, I've just been doing lots of research, market research, and talking to other guides and talking to people, potential clients and things, and figuring out if my plan of how I'm going to guide is going to work. And I hope it. I mean, it's worked so far this summer.
Yeah.
I've had to work full time and do it, but it's worked great. I've loved it, and I know I'm just getting started, just tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
I mean, I know guys that have been doing it for 20 years and 30 years, even longer than I've been alive. And I will take advice, of course. I always ask these guys for advice and their take on things. But, I'm doing things a little bit differently because that's what drew me into making this decision and this career change and leaving a very lucrative, cush government job to be out in the sun and heat and working my ass off every day.
Yeah.
Honestly.
No, sure. I'm with you, brother. Well, it's funny because, like, listen to you talk in the defining moment, or, again, kind of shifting the mindset. I chartered when I actually lived back in let me rephrase that. I chartered, and then when I moved back to Mississippi Gulf Coast, I then reestablished the charter business, Southern Salt Charters, out of Port Sulphur, Louisiana, just doing really sight fishing charters. And I really enjoyed it, man. I really enjoyed the people that you meet. But I will say this, though, man, and I didn't particularly care for the day in, day out grind of that, as more
Mm-hmm.
so, and this is maybe my infatuation with fishing in general, and that's why I love targeting big trout, because that wasn't what I wanted to do. Like, I was sight fishing redfish, and you know as well as anybody, man, I hate freaking redfish. And so the last thing dude, when we fished, me and Brandon Treadway, my tournament fishing partner, when we fished the IFA Redfish Tour and the HT3 and the GCCA and all these different tournament trails, when we would pre-fish, dude, we'd have to go catch a limit of trout or at least go trout fishing before we even went sight fishing. And so that's how kind of involved. But it's awesome to hear you kind of, hey, you know what? I'm making this conscious decision. It's kind of in my business profile, if you will, to cater to, you know, certain clientele and then bring that experience to these people, man. And I tell you, it's not for everyone. And I definitely see that it is for you, brother. And you're doing a hell of a job, an amazing job thus far. So first off, while we have it, right, because it's our podcast, but what's the name of your charter company, man?
Coastal Waters Outfitters.
Coastal Waters Outfitters on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And then you all over the Gulf Coast, man, all sorts of stuff. So, but I want to talk, if you don't mind, brother, I'd like to transition a little bit here, just because the reason you're here and on the podcast is because we are for lack of better terms, man, Speckled Truth, dude. You know what I'm saying? And like, I know Edward's with us, and Ed Crum and Keith Morrison, and we have our little group. But on the same token is, man, you're like the OG, man, with us. So obviously I know, but you know, we met in a pretty different, I guess, way. And so the inshore fishing community is very, very small on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, for those of you that don't know. And so I was posting a lot on, I think, Bull Nettle, and I saw you come across there, and all of a sudden kind of one thing led to two. And then I didn't really know a whole lot about you. So I don't know what your thoughts were there.
So, you know, back when you and Kyle Perry lived here, and y'all were doing y'all's thing on the Bull Nettle, and I really hope Sam Davis listens to this, because I love Sam. And he's gonna agree 100%. But that was like the height of the Bull Nettle for me. You know, I know the Bull Nettle's probably been around longer than when I was looking. But going back to what I said earlier, you know, I do more research than I do like actually doing something. I know that, you know, when it comes to fishing, you have to get out there and you have to put in your time. But also, you know, sometimes instead of sitting around and playing on Facebook and looking at all the people who have caught fish, actually going back and reading things and learning things and being open-minded. And I remember you and Kyle Perry posting all that stuff and doing your videos and all that. And it was just awesome, dude. And I loved it. And then you started the Speckled. I remember the Speckled Truth, and man, I wish I had a screenshot. I hope you do. But I remember your website, and it was like doo-doo brown background. and it was white lettering with a doo-doo brown background. And I was like, what in the world? But dude, the content was so legit. It was like nothing, you know, there was nothing else out there that I could find that was like specifically talking about big trout.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going a little more in depth to this question than I should, but I kind of feel like I have to this is how we met. So, you know, I was raised by a very good trout fisherman. He's my stepdad, Mike Anderson, but I mean, he's my dad. You know, he raised me. That's my dad. So, and I actually started backwards, dude. It wasn't, you know, a live shrimp under a popping cork. It was a MirrOlure 7M, you know? And so I kind of learned backwards. Like actually the past couple years, I've had to learn, like, you know, not that it's hard, but you know, it's easy to say you know how to do something until you actually do it. You have to actually do it to like know about it. So, you know, I had like the first couple years, I didn't even really live bait. It was all MirrOlures, because that's what he used, because that's how he caught the trout that he wanted to catch. Now, he did target big trout, but it was more keepers, and it was more numbers, and it wasn't it wasn't for the meat hauls. My dad's a very, very smart dude. He's a veterinarian. I'm going to sit here and say he's the best in the Southeast. I mean, he's a great veterinarian, very smart guy. And I think he loves fishing the same reason I do. And it's not because he passed it on to me. It's just because how we are. But it's the challenge, dude. It's the challenge of getting that fish on artificial. And so, I was raised about numbers, and that's how a lot of guys are raised fishing. You hear me say it's numbers fishing, numbers guys. And it's not talking down to anybody. There's different types of fishermen, different types of trout fishermen. And there's guys that go for numbers, and there's guys that go for trophies and big trout.
Yeah.
And you can do both. I mean, I do both sometimes. I don't really go for numbers now to keep them. I throw them back or I tag them. But, doing that for so long, and you did it too. You grew up doing it, going out there, and everybody starts out that way because that's how we were all raised, like our generation. And it was raised about numbers. So when I started, I wouldn't say I was getting bored with numbers, but trout fishing, yes, it is complicated, but the Mississippi coast, it's a very unique place, and it's not as big as a fishery as, say, Louisiana or Florida or anything. Yeah. So
South Carolina, even, man. I mean, I fished there. Dude, Mississippi is a postage stamp compared to the majority of the fisheries, other than Alabama. Right near next door.
So when you really get hardcore into it and you're spending all your time, especially when you don't have kids, like, and you're spending all your time fishing, and that's all you're doing. And it's not that hard to get on top of them. And once you get on top of them and you figure out the pattern, and if you write it down, they do the same thing almost every year. And it might be like a week out or something like that because of some sort of weather change or something like that. But if you want to really go for numbers, you start a fish log and you start writing down the tide and all that. And back then I didn't know, to keep up with the moon more, but I just wrote down, the tide that day and the number of fish caught, because it's a numbers game when you're in that mindset. And, dude, honestly, it just kind of got old. It was like, okay, I'm going out, I'm catching these fish, and I'm getting my limit, because that's what you're going out there to do. And it's just kind of like, all right, what next?
Let me ask you this. Do you remember the first big trout you caught?
The first big trout, yes. Well, you remember this because it wasn't my first big trout, but my first 5-pound trout, because that was kind of my benchmark. Like I knew, a 3 and 4 pounder was a big fish. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get past that 5-pound thing. And that's when me and you, that's where I was getting at. That's where me and you started talking more, because I set a goal with myself, and I'd missed a lot of big trout, and I'd caught, I don't even know how many. And I was like, okay, I want to set a goal for myself, and I want to catch a 5-pound trout, just because I haven't. A lot of my friends had, and I hadn't caught one. And so, it's a very famous place here, and it's Gulfport Harbor, and it'll break your heart, and it'll make dreams come true all in the same trip. And there's a lot of big trout that get caught there. So I don't live far from Gulfport Harbor, and so I just started fishing it every day, dude. I would get up before work, even if I could only fish for 2 hours out of a 14-foot skiff, no matter what the wind was doing, safely. And I would fish it every morning, trying to figure that place out. And still, to this day, it's a very complicated place. It really is. Like sometimes all the rules apply there, like the moon and the wind and the tide and the bait and all of that. And then other times you just go there at 2:00 in the afternoon and you're catching 6 and 7 pounders. It's crazy. It's insane. So I was out there and I was fishing, and I know you remember this because me and you had just been talking, and I was throwing a lot of topwaters, a lot of she dogs.
I was about to say,
and that's all I was doing, man. I was throwing big topwaters, and this is what kind of started me as like big bait, big fish. I still stick to that. I throw a lot of really obnoxiously big baits for fish, but I was just like, I'm just going to throw this because I know this is what catches big fish, and I know there's big fish here. And I kept getting these just monster blow ups, and I kept losing these massive fish. And I started messaging you, and I was like, dude, I don't get it, man. I keep losing all these big fish. Like, something's got to be wrong. And you asked me, you were like, well, what kind of rod are you using? And I was like, well, I'm using a medium heavy. Every time I use mirror lures, I use a medium heavy, which I still do when it comes to suspending twitch baits and things like that. I feel like you get more of that jerk because it's all about that quick jerk with the wrist. So I was using medium heavies, and you're like, "Oh no, dude, no, you gotta step it down. Like that's what's happening. That's why you're losing them." And I was like, "You really think so?" And you were like, "Yeah, definitely." Like you knew that's what it was. So that afternoon we had talked, and I got up that morning, and I think I had like a 7-foot medium rod, and I put that he dog on there. I said she dog earlier.
I was gonna correct you, dude, because I knew it was a he dog. Yep.
Yeah, so I put that he dog on there, and I get out there, and the bite had been right at daylight, and I was getting these massive blow ups, but I never really got like the really good bite, like multiple blow ups in a row. So I get out there, and nobody's out there, and I want to say it was January. No, it was January.
Yep.
And so I get out there, and it's not that cold, and the sun's coming up, and I'm throwing, and nothing, no bites, no nothing. And I'm like, well, there goes my window, and I got to go to work. And I was just like, man, screw it. I'm just going to fish here for a couple hours. I'll call in and come in late.
Yeah.
And so, God, man, somebody from work's going to listen to this too and wrap me out or some shit. But I'm sitting there and I'm fishing, and I start seeing mullet getting chased, and I see the nervous water, and I'm like, that's gotta be trout. Can't be red. So I throw over there, and then boom, 4-pound trout, and I get it in, and I'm like, damn, that's a nice trout. Throw him back, throw it out there, boom, 4.5-pound trout. And this is like throw after throw. I was like, oh my God, I'm getting all giddy and stuff. And I'm like, there's gotta be a big one in here. Throw it back out there, and I think it was another 4.5-pound trout, and then throw it back out there, and then it was a 3-pound trout. And I was like, oh great, they're getting smaller. So, I had those 3, to me, big trout in a row, and I'm just like, hell yeah, like, I'm on fire. And so I keep throwing it out there, and I'm getting these blow ups. I'm getting some small blow ups. And what I would do is if I got a small blow up, I would just kind of get it out of there. Cause I was like, in my head, I was like, okay, there's not a big fish over there. And the area I was fishing, I throw it just right up on these rocks. And what I would do, and I hope we get to this later when we fish with Mike McBride, but what I would do is I slow rolled that he dog, dude. I mean, the cadence was just like, it wasn't like crazy slow, but it would just make that lure just chug. It would just chug, chug. And I think when you do it at a certain speed, that it chugs, and then when it's sitting there, that high pitch is just kind of rattling too. So I think you get the best of both worlds when you work it that way. And man, I'm just sitting there just chugging that thing slow, and I just stop, and then that fish hit, and it just I could have sworn it was a damn redfish, and I was getting so mad because it nailed it, and it stayed down the entire time. It stayed down and just dug, and I was in shallow water. And once I got it out to the deeper water, I was on a little drop off that goes to about 7 or 8 feet. It just stayed down, and it was just peel and drag. And I was like, it's a stupid ass redfish. And so I get it up, and then I see it, and I was just like, start freaking out. My heart starts racing. I'm like, oh my God, this is it. And so I get it, and I get him in the net, and I throw him on the deck. And before I even weighed it, I put, I was wearing these size 12 and a half Wolverine work boots. And I put it next to that boot, and I take a picture and I send it to you. That was the first thing I did. You were like, holy shit. I was like, yeah, I was like, I think this is the one. And then after that, I weighed it, and it was over 5 pounds. Honestly, man, I don't remember the exact. It was like five something. and it was over 5 pounds, and that feeling and that reward. And I told you, I'd been going there every morning for something crazy. It was like a week or two straight every morning. And dude, that reward was just like,
So
it changed
me.
It changed the way that I fished, not only for trout, but for everything. It changed me.
Oh my God, dude. And I'm so glad you touched on that, because that is the one thing in big trout fishing, and I'm talking big trout. So let's say 5+ or bigger, right? And then so that you just cannot describe to people. So I always ask the question, right? I wrote that blog, 1 or 100. And it's funny to see people like, oh, I'll catch 100 dinks over one 10-pound trout any day. They eat better and everything. I'm like, that's because, dude, you have never held a big fish, because when you do, I guarantee you, you will not want to do anything else. And Dario, I fished with my buddy here, never caught a fish over, I think it was like 5.5 pounds. And we had gone a couple times, and then finally he ended up sticking a 28. And he's always been a redfish guy and everything else. And now he is just completely ate up with the big trout bug, because when he landed that big trout in same situation, he thought it was a redfish, pull and drag, super stoked. And he was like, oh no. And as that fish came up, shook one more time, I mean, knees went weak. I mean, the dude's pale as a ghost. You could see he's just kind of shuffling. Oh my God. And he gets it in, finally on a boga grip, and he is like just shaking, man, visibly shaking. And he's so excited. And he's like, man, all these casts, like all this study, all, like everything is encapsulated in this one fish right here that I'm holding. And then he releases it and he goes, let's do it again. Like it was ready to go again, like empty cast after empty cast, trip after trip without any results. It's tough fishing, but dude, it's just fuel to the fire, and it's so awesome, man. So I'm glad you touched on that, bro.
I have to go back a little bit. There's so much more to that story, but there's one important thing I missed out. So that's what kind of started, the whole point of this conversation was you and I's relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what started it. That's when we exchanged phone numbers and we started talking. Yep. And, I told you that the reason I started a blog was because, I saw yours with the Speckled Truth, and, I had my blog for a little bit, and it was more for like beginner fishermen, and it wasn't just geared towards trout. It was just beginner fishermen in general. And, so when we were talking one night, we were talking about big trout. Of course, that's all we ever talked about.
Pretty much.
And it was like 2 and 3 hour conversations. It was like we were in freaking middle school when we were little girls talking back and forth. But I think it ignited a little more passion in you too, because you got really excited at a lot of those conversations.
Oh, dude.
But I remember we were talking, and you didn't know me that well. We had never fished together. The only way that you had knew me was from Facebook,
from the bowl, for sure,
and things like that. And you can kind of tell through things like that, the way people say things, whether or not they kind of know what they're doing, like they know what's going on. And you trusted me from the way I portrayed myself, and you said something to me, and that's what changed my mindset when fishing for big trout. And there's all these variables for all kinds of things when it comes to fishing, but you said one thing that stood out to me, that stuck in my head, and you said, you always call me KJ, and you were like, KJ, if you put in the amount of effort that you put into catching numbers just to catch a big trout, you will catch big trout and you will be successful at it. And nobody had ever said that to me, because when you start first, everybody's different, but a lot of people, when they first start fishing for big trout, they go out, and if they don't do good on big trout, they got to do something to satisfy themselves before they go home. And they don't want to feel like a wasted trip. And it's understandable, very understandable, especially now since I have a family and a job, and I do all these things on the side, and my time is just feels like I don't have enough hours in the day. And I totally get that. But luckily for me, then it was just me and Courtney were just dating, and I could do whatever I wanted. That's why I married her, because I could literally do whatever the hell I wanted. So, well, I mean, well, why not? Chick lets you go fishing whenever you want. It's 1:00 in the morning, and I'm like, hey, I'm going fishing. She's just like, okay, she didn't care. So, but when you first start fishing for big trout, what you don't realize is you need those trips of nothing, just absolutely nothing, not even a bite.
Yep.
And it humbles your ass, and you're just like, man, like this is a lot harder than I thought. And what I did, and me and you talked about this as well, is I totally changed my mindset, and I was just like, I'm going to be happy if I at least get a bite or a blow up. And I knew it was a big trout. And you have to, like, you tell yourself that, and you think you're convinced, and you're not, because it happens. And then you're just pissed off that you didn't land it. And then you go home, and then you're mad that you didn't land it. Mm-hmm. But once you like fully accept that, and you're like, okay, I was in the right place. I was at the right time. I had the opportunity. Luck plays a factor into fishing. It really does. Sometimes you just get lucky, and you're just like, maybe I just didn't have luck on my side that day. Maybe I should have gave that bum at the gas station $1 or something. Maybe I needed some good karma. But when you accept that, and you accept that mindset, and now I can do it. I can turn it on and off like a light switch. If I go fishing with Troy Hellwig or Ed Crum or Shane Overstreet and some of the other guys I fish with, when we only fish for big trout, that circle of mine is very small, because around here, it's totally different style of fishing. It's not like going somewhere and catching a limit of trout somewhere that everybody else catches a limit of trout. If you go somewhere and you can consistently catch, 5+ pound trout, Jesus, everybody on the coast wants to know where you're going. So,
and it ain't a big coast, dude. So you can get dudes from Pascagoula over to Bay St. Louis real quick,
Yeah. And it's almost like, it's almost like tournament fishing when you're not tournament fishing. That's pretty much what I relate it to. It's like tournament fishing, except you're not going to win a lot of money. You're just satisfied, and you have to go with that mindset. And it sucks, dude. It does. I love it, but it sucks because, you get to that certain point in your life, and there's probably going to be younger guys listening to this, like in their early 20s that are just like, these dudes are old, but you get kids and you get busy, and that time just dwindles, man. You got these little windows that you can fish, and you're like, okay, am I going to go and just have a good time and drink beers with the boys and just have like relax? Or am I going to go and try to get that big fish because I haven't had one in a while? And when you make that decision, you have to stick with it. You can't, you have to go home empty-handed and distraught. And next time you go, you fuel that, and it all adds up, because once you do get that big fish, and unfortunately, going back to that story, I did not release that 5-pounder. My mindset was not where it is now. I really wish I would have now, of course. Like, I really regret it. But that also feeds into the person I became now. Maybe if I would have let that fish go, I wouldn't be so big on conservation as I am now because of that fish. So, everything happens for a reason. But, that feeling of catching that fish, all of that hard work paying off, and then watching it swim away and watching that tail, Mississippi, it's got that, we got some muddy water. It's not, sometimes it's kind of clear, but watching it just kind of disappear in that muddy water, that big old tail just swim off. Dude, that's a hard feeling to beat. It really is.
It is, man. It's indescribable too, and it just generates mental toughness in your, presentation and your approach to fishing, different things and different techniques. It just does more than just help you target a big fish. It does all these other intangibles that you really just don't realize, and
you don't even think about.
Yeah, until you do it repetitively, that's when you go, you know what? Like, I mean, I'm like you, dude. I can fish 3 straight days and not get a bite. But as I'm reflecting on, of course I'll be upset. But on the same token, as I'm reflecting and I'm drawing confidence with every cast because I know through all the study, through all the, preparation, all this stuff, I feel and I have confidence in my own abilities to read water, to fish different, techniques and presentations, and that, hey, I'm going to put myself in the best possible situation to catch these big fish. And so it just generates all these intangibles that you don't really think about until you actually start fishing those big fish. But anyway, well, dude, the thing that stands out to me was when I moved I wish we had met like 2 years before we actually truly did when I lived in the coast, right? I mean, we are kicking ourselves in the tail right now because we're so far apart and we have so many things to do Speckled Truth wise. And yet we're, 700 miles away from each other. And we try to make it happen. We do our best, all of the guys. But can you imagine if we're actually close together? My God, that'd be amazing. But I remember in Florida, man, when I was living there, we had obviously had that relationship thus far. And I remember you saying, you know what? I don't think I'm going to do Kyle Johnson fishing anymore, man. I really want to help Speckled Truth. And that, to me, that was a kind of to some extent, life-changing moment, especially with regards to Speckled Truth, because it had been a hobby to that point. And it's still a hobby, man, because it's my passion, it's our love. But it's much more than that now, because at that moment, it was more than me. It was you. And now together, you believe in kind of the message, me just kind of throwing stuff out there. And all of a sudden we started to generate this network, and it went from like 1,500 followers to now we're almost 15,000 on Facebook. That was only 2 years ago. Or 3 years ago. That's not that long ago that you called that.
I told you, dude, I knew, and I have to go back just a little bit. So Kyle Johnson Fishing was just like my blog, it was, that was like 2016, I guess. And I started that, and I was just kind of like, I don't know, for some reason, I kind of wanted to like come out into the fishing industry, and I kept talking to people like, what do I need to do? And everybody kept saying, get your name out there, get your name out there, get your name out there. That's literally what everybody told me. So, in less than a year, I got on the cover of Coastal Angler magazine, and I started getting in magazines, and then I started writing for magazines, and then I got into photography, and I started taking pictures and all that stuff. And I didn't want to guide. I didn't want to be a charter captain. I didn't want to guide. And eventually I was like, why am I doing this? And I was like, it's kind of pointless. It wasn't for self-satisfaction. And there was a guy I talked to, man, I can't remember his name. I really wish I could. And I hope he's not listening, because he'd probably be pissed I don't remember his name. But he's the one who kind of hooked me up with Coastal Angler, and it was just a lot of networking. And then one thing he told me, he was like, well, what's your plan? And I was like, my plan? I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, why are you doing all this? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, because I kept asking everybody what I need to do, and they say, get your name out there. So that's what I'm doing. And he just laughed really hard. And he was like, well, what the hell are you getting your name out there for? I said, I don't know, man. That's what I was told to do. So it was just kind of like, I had no plan, and I didn't know why I was doing the things I was doing. And then, I obviously believed in you, and I believed in the mission and the passion, and your dad and all of that. And I was just kind of like, why am I spending all this time promoting myself for no reason? And it honestly wasn't for, just to be that guy that's in a magazine or something. I wanted to have some sort of career in the fishing industry, but didn't really know what I wanted to do. And a lot of it's about networking, and it's about who you know. And going down that path, it opened a lot of doors for me that, are helping now with me guiding, getting on the pro staffs and the sponsorships and all that stuff. Hell yeah, that shit's paying off now. I mean, it was then when I was just
but
fishing.
You have a plan. You have a plan
now. Yeah. Now I have an actual plan. But I remember the conversation when we were talking, and so the reason I said all that was because I kind of figured some things out about Facebook, and Not so much Instagram. I still kind of suck at Instagram. That thing drives me crazy. We grew the Speckled Truth Instagram up. It blew up, but mine still kind of sucks. It's at like 2,500 people, and I'm just kind of like, damn, we grew the Speckled Truth. I can't even do my own. But the Facebook, it was kind of easy, and things have changed a lot since we started, a lot. But I remember us talking, and I was just like, I remember telling you, I was like, dude, we got to get to 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get to 10,000, we have a pretty good audience, and it's really going to, start growing from there. And you were just kind of like, well, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? And we just started talking a lot and planning things out and the content.
Yep.
And that's when we started brainstorming a lot, and brought Ed in and brought Keith in. And
dude, that was
it got to 10,000 quick, all organic. I'm going to go ahead and say this on record on the podcast. We did not pay a dime in advertising on Facebook. And I know it's not a crazy number, but now with the way the algorithms are, I'd be hard pressed to see somebody reach 10,000 followers on a business page without paying a dime in advertising. It's all pure passion driven. That's all it is. And we figured out how to reach those people, and the content is legit. And once people started seeing the content, and that was something I had to keep telling you, it wasn't very fast. It did eventually start popping off, but for a while there, you were just kind of like, man, and I was like, dude, it's just a slow process. These people have to see it. They have to tell their friends have to see it. We never claimed to be anything. We never came out and said, oh, we're the authority to big trout. We never said that. We wanted people to read and see that, hey, we're the only people that are just dedicated to big trout and sharing the passion, conservation, and the knowledge of how to catch bigger trout. And we let the followers figure that out. That was our strategy that we came up with.
And that was the conscious decision. That's why it's so hard to explain to people that, like, they're like, oh, you boost post and you got to do this and that. And we're like, no, we're not going to do that. And they're like, why? Because you could grow your population. And we're like, we don't want to do that, man. We want a like and a share and people to comment because they feel that stuff as much as we do, right? And and we talk about this a lot, but I want everybody else to know, like, that is what's long standing about our endeavor, is that, man, look, we don't pay for anything. We don't endorse anything. We don't really have any of that, right? But what we do is promote a fishery and a love for that fishery. And the only way people like, share, and do all that stuff is because they have that same love for that fishery. And dude, that's the stuff that sticks around forever. And instead of this, hey, we got to 100,000 followers by making these gimmicky videos and this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, you're going to be around for a while, but you're going to go away. And we want our message to stick around. And that's where, dude, I mean, that changed, dude. That changed in that phone call in Florida. Whether I guess maybe we like it or not, it drives us mad, dude, sometimes, because this is our second life, man. Or now your third life. Yeah. Jeez. So,
well, and so, it's what sucks, man, is unfortunately the way the Facebook algorithms and where we are at with Speckled Truth. And I hope our followers understand this, and I hope they listen to this, is Chris, we are going to have to start paying for advertising, because that's what we're going to have to do to grow from here on out. And what people need to realize, and I think they do know this, but we've never really said it. We've never, like I said, we never claimed to be anything. We never brag about anything. We never, we try and stay humble, and we don't make any money off of the Speckled Truth. Like, people need to realize that there's $0 going into any of our pockets for the Speckled Truth. We do this to do it. We do it because we love it. That any money, all the shirts, the hats, the promotions, all those things we do, it goes back into the Speckled Truth. You funded the Dirty 30 program out of your own pocket. We were getting free product from companies, and we were paying to ship their product for a program that we came up with. And I don't think,
Yeah.
we didn't tell anybody
No.
that. And I'm telling them now, just because the next couple of steps with the Speckled Truth, we have to do some things we haven't been doing, but that's because things are changing and we have to keep up with those. And we want to grow and we want to share the message, but we're not doing what other people are doing. You see all these ads and all these things on Facebook, and it's all this like get rich quick schemes and all this crap, but we're not making money. We're doing this for the love of speckled trout and big speckled trout and the conservation of speckled trout. And might I add, we're not throwing that down people's throats about conservation. We're just trying to educate them about, if you want to keep a big trout, hey, that's cool. You can keep it. We've all done it. Everybody that's involved with Speckled Truth. So we're not going to sit here and hound somebody and make fun of them or whatever. Yeah. Some of the pictures we've shared of big trout, with those trout were harvested legally. And we don't say that, and we don't, we don't say it's a bad thing, and we don't not promote it because it was harvested, because, we've been there. If I catch a big one now, there's no way in hell I'm going to keep it unless for some reason it's dead. Like, I can't revive it. I'm not going to try and risk killing it, for a picture or whatever. But if it is actually like legitimately dead, I pull it in, it's dead or whatever, yes, I'm going to keep it.
But we're celebrating the life of that fish, man. I mean, whether you like it or not. I mean, if a person who's never caught an 8-pound fish decides to harvest that fish to mount it, dude, you will not hear Pete from me. Of course, I would love to see it released. Of course. Right. I mean, but on the same token is that fish, looking back, it's like 8 or 9 years. I mean, it's had a great life. Obviously, we want those genetics in the fishery, but on the same token is that fish has lived a life. It has given a memory to somebody that's going to live forever. And so let them have that moment, man. Let's celebrate the life of that fish and that person. And that's what we do, man. It's nothing like, oh, you didn't keep it. Now, we're going to hound your butt for the next 30 minutes and we're going to get people to start commenting and hate mailing you and everything else. No, man, like, dude, let's just celebrate this fish and this fishery, man. And that's what we want to do. And the message, getting back to the Dirty 30 program and us funding it, we see the value in knowing more about our fishery. We invested in our fishery with that money by getting the data and understanding that fishery more. Hey everyone, I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout, as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, Miralure, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this will be possible. And we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion. We went to the Biloxi Boat Show 2 years ago, right? And I remember we talking about it. Ed was with us, Keith Morrison, and they'll be on the podcast, and they'll talk about it as well. But that first boat show, the Biloxi Boat Show, 2 years ago, I don't know what your thoughts were, dude. I'm like, hey, let's get a booth at the Biloxi Boat Show. What were you thinking?
I mean, I was excited. I was like, we have a good presence here because you lived here and, I live here and I obviously promote the hell out of Speckled Truth. And that's, and a lot of people knew about you through the Bull Nettle and it kind of spread. So we have Speckled Truth has a very big presence here in the whole Mississippi Gulf Coast. And I remember when you were like, hey, let's get a booth. And, if you remember correctly, I was like, hell yeah. Because going back again, I keep saying this, but going back to earlier,
it starts from there, right?
Everything kind of stems together, because when I was doing the big push, for whatever reason I was doing that push, I ended up, getting close with companies like Egret Baits and Ken Shamant. And it wasn't because they allowed me to be close to them. It was because I love Egret Baits. I love their products. I use the hell out of them. And and Ken Chamont and Jamie. God, Jamie is so awesome. I love Jamie. She's great.
Yeah.
If you've ever bought a Egret Baits product, you have probably dealt with Jamie, and she is one of a kind. I love that woman. But I ended up working my first couple booths at shows with Egret Baits, and the first show I worked was with Jamie, and it was in Jackson, and it's actually a dealer show, and it's a pretty big deal.
Was that Ferris Brothers?
And it's a Ferris Brothers show in Jackson, Mississippi. And so I go up there, and Ken had asked me if I wanted to do it, and I was like, yeah. And I was kind of nervous. I was like, didn't really know what to expect. It was my first show, but in my mind, I was just kind of like, okay, this is going to be easy. All I have to do is talk about fishing and talk about why I like using these products that I use, which is easy because I actually believe in the product and I actually use it, and I know a lot about them. So in my mind, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. So then, I get up there, and I don't do it that much now, but I used to fast every once in a while. Like I could go like half a day without eating as long as I stayed busy and I didn't think about it. It didn't bother me, right?
Yeah.
But there's something about just sitting somewhere and talking to people that just completely mentally and physically drains you. It's the weirdest thing ever. And this is how I figured this out, was because of this incident is we're up there and we're talking to people, and I hadn't eaten anything, and I'm drinking water, and me and Jamie are talking and talking and talking. And it was just a lot of people, a lot of people. And I hadn't really talked to that many people at once. You know what I mean? You don't really have that kind of interaction before this, and it's very fast paced. You don't have breaks to go take a piss or take a sip of water. You kind of start forgetting those things, and you're just trying to like do what you're there to do. And you get in that mindset, like when you're working out and you're just thinking about getting to the last rep. But when you're doing this, it's like, there is no fucking last rep. It just keeps going and going and going and going. And so like it got to that point, and I looked at Jamie, and she was like, you look kind of pale. I was like, yeah, I just got to go to the bathroom. And I like tried to play it off cool. And it was one of those things where like probably when you're drunk and you think you're like walking straight and you're stumbling, like I was thinking in my head, I was like, I probably look fine. And I go in the bathroom, I look at myself, and I look like I'm drunk. And I'm like, what the hell? And I throw up because I hadn't ate all day, and I have like anxiety, and I'm freaking out,
shaking.
And I throw up. And I just like, I kind of left Jamie stranded there. I was like, I gotta get something to eat. So I ran out and got something to eat. I didn't leave the show. I just ran to a spot, got something to eat in the show, and went back to the booth. But that like kind of set a benchmark for me, was like, okay, this is what working a booth is like at a popular event. Right. It's a lot more than you think it is. And I remember telling you and Ed that a lot before this show. I was like, guys, this is like, it's a pain in the ass. And I was like, and that was my first show. And I'd done a lot of them since that one, before the Biloxi Boat Show we did with Speckled Truth. So I had my own little thing. I was like, we got to have beer there. Yep. We got to have food. We got to have a little bit of whiskey. I was like, we got to have these things. Like we have to have them. And like, y'all, like we had that plan of having that tank and catching those big trout and putting them in there, those live trout in that tank. And like, yes, that was on my priority list, but like that was the only thing on y'all's list. And in my mind, I'm thinking back to the first time I did a show and I like freaked out and threw up. And I'm like, I gotta have beer. I gotta have food. Like I have to be comfortable, And those kind of things, they kind of went to the back burner. But we ended up having all those things, and we had a good time. But I remember when you came up with the idea, and I was just like, my first thought was like, there's no way we could like logistically do that. Like it's a great idea, but there's no way. And then you were just kind of like,
we're going to make it happen.
Like, and it's not an option. And I was just like, okay, well, screw it. So let's try.
So
this could go bad. But.
So for those who don't know, right, the first Biloxi Boat Show we did, we had a 300-gallon tank which is massive. Which is huge. And we didn't realize, and we had 3 live trout in there. And that was our, like, dude, I was so fixated on getting a live tank there and getting 3 trophy trout, like legitimate trophy trout in there, and putting them there and have them alive in the booth. And because if we're going to do a boat show, the first one that we're going to do, and we're a trophy trout company, let's say, that promotes conservation, dadgummit, we're going to have big trout and they're going to be alive. And dude, we set the precedent, right? I have never seen that done before or since, and we've now done it twice in 2 straight years. Obviously, last year was a lot easier, which we'll talk about here in a sec. But dude, that 300-gallon tank, the logistics of that thing was
such a headache. God, it was a headache. Like you came up with the idea, and so I start talking with the research lab, and Angelos, he's at Southern Miss Gulf Coast Research Lab, and great dude. I love Angelos. He's the manager of the hatchery there, and I talked with him, and you know him too, and we ran this by him, and of course he was like, "You're going to have a really big tank if you want 3 big fish." And so Keith, I love Keith, and I have all these videos, and I've yet to show you all these, but I'm about to get it fired back up. But while we were filming these, like Keith was being Keith, and Keith is like that guy in a funny video that just pops up and just says something funny and just disappears. And so and he did that when we were filming when he came on my boat, and me, Ed, and him caught that 5-pounder. Ed caught the 5-pounder that we contributed to that tank. You caught the other 2. And I remember all of us talking, and we're all like, what are we going to do? How are we going to get this tank? And then here comes Keith. He just popped up. Oh, I can get a 300-gallon tank. And we were like, okay. Where are you going to get that from? He's like, don't worry about it, man. I got it. And then he just shows up to Biloxi, Mississippi with a 300-gallon tank in the back of his Tacoma. And then we tried to plan this out the best we could, but he brings it to the back of the loading dock, and we're like, how the hell are we going to get this thing out of your truck? And we're all just going like, I don't know, And then, we get off with this guy on the forklift was like, hey, you need me to get that? And we were like, yeah, man, could you get this for us? And, we get that, and we had the DMR put the water. I mean, that's a lot. That's the thing that, people came there and they saw that, and they're like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. But they didn't understand everything that went to that. Yeah. So 300 gallons, so think about that. Think about a tank that's holding 300 gallons and how much 300 gallons weighs. So you just can't go get a plastic table from Walmart and put on that. You can't just buy a table that's going to work. So, I told y'all, I was like, okay, I'm going to handle the table. Yep. So I got a good friend of mine, Justin Lucas. He works for NASA. He's an engineer. Kind of, that's kind of like I went a little farther than I probably should have. But the dude's a genius, and it literally all it was I called him, and we talk every once in a while, and I was just like, hey man, like this is what's going on, and he was just like, oh cool, what's the dimensions of the tank? So I gave him the dimensions of the tank. I told him how much it held, how much water we were gonna have in it. He's like, oh yeah, sure man, no problem. And literally, like we get off the phone. And he tells me before we got the phone, he was like, I'm going to draw it up in CAD and I'll email it to you. And I was like, okay. So I was like, oh, this guy, it'll probably be a couple of days, before I get it. So we hang up, and like not even 5 minutes later, I get an email, and I'm like, there's no way, like no way. And I opened the email, and it was just like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was just like, it was this perfect CAD drawing. It had instructions. It had a materials list. I was just like, this is crazy. I was like, that was way easier than I thought it was going to be. So we went and got the materials, and me and my dad and my buddy Stephen Irby, we threw it all together, and it was, it was serious. I still had the table.
We used it
last
year.
Right now. Yeah. And so we get that table and we put it together and we stain it. And dude, I have to look at the specs on that email. But that table can hold an insane amount of weight. It's something stupid. It's like 3,000 pounds or something. And it was all like built up from Justin. But people don't realize that that's what went into having a fish tank and having fish.
That's just
at the
that's just the table, right? We had to get the water, right, from DMR, like you had already mentioned. Not only that, we had to get live sand. We had to get pumps. We had to then, by the grace of God, Keith, again, that dude out of randomly nowhere knows 2 people that just manage the tanks at the Bass Pro Shops there in Spanish Fort, Alabama. He's like, oh, yeah, my friends, they manage the big tanks. And so they're like, oh, and so they come over and take care of the fish for the 3 days free of charge. And then all of a sudden we actually go and fish 3 straight days and catch 3 5-pounders to throw in there. Dude, it was like everything just straight up lined up for that show. It was like, oh, here's an obstacle. Got it. Yeah, no problem. And like just kept throwing things in there. But dude, we made it happen. I remember Mary Bland, when I first called her, and she's the show coordinator and the show manager. And she's like, okay, what's the name of your business? And I'm like, Speckled Truth. And she's like, okay, what will you be selling? And I'm like, we're not selling anything. And she's like,
what do you want a booth for,
so you're
guy?
paying $600 to sell nothing? And I'm like, yeah, we're this online fishing community. And she's like, okay, whatever, $600, you owe it by 15 October. And so we get there. Ronnie's like, hey, what's up, guys? Da-da-da. Obviously, Ronnie Daniels. And when we put the tank up there, that was the thing I think that stood out to me the most, is the most memorable thing. You had John Folterman, you had Ronnie Daniels, you had all these other show vendors that were there. And so you put the table there, boom, we get that puppy set up. We got 2 ice chests, 220 quart ice chests full of 5-pound trout, right? And water. We got DMR there with their tank. And then all of a sudden we forklift off this 300-gallon tank and put it on this table. And the people that are managing the tank, I can't remember, I think their name was Carrie, if I'm not mistaken. She starts pumping in the water, and all of a sudden, man, the panes on the actual tank start to kind of bow out a little bit. And everybody in the show setup just stops. Remember that? And dude, everybody kind of semicircles around this thing. And Mary Bland's standing right next to me. Ronnie's got his phone out. He's like videotaping this. And he looks over to me, goes, brother, he goes, if you're going to single-handedly ruin the whole boat show, he's like, I may as well get it on film. And I'm like, oh my God. And Mary's like, that tank's going to hold, right? I'm like, I don't know. She's like, oh, Jesus God. And so by the grace of God, man, that damn thing held. We got on the news. We did all sorts of other stuff. And 3 days later, man, we had the most popular booth at the show. We had a crowd, man, just kind of all around us. And it was just so awesome, dude, that people came out to just see us and talk to us and say, bro, like, I really appreciate all you doing. And then not only that, the people that didn't know about us now learning, and with their kids and the parents and the children coming up to the glass and taking a picture with these live trout. When 2 booths down, you got ice chests full of dead trout. And so it's just this lasting presence of how beautiful this fish is, let alone 5-pounders. That just resonates, man, and just leaves this long-standing thing. And so that was an amazing show, bro. And it without a doubt couldn't have happened without all of you guys. But thanks for believing in me, man. Oh my God, that was crazy, dude.
And just to put something into perspective to some of the audience listening to this, and some of you. We have our biggest following is obviously in Texas. Texas is a huge state, big trout, and you might not think 3 5-pound trout that's not that impressive, but in Biloxi, if you could have been there and seen these people, so if you ever look at a fish in a tank, you look from these different angles, they look way smaller until you get right up to it. So you got all these people in Biloxi, and a 5-pound trout's a really good trout here.
Absolutely.
We have a good fishery. We have lots of really solid fish. That's a little bit of a difference between Mississippi and Louisiana. Louisiana has way more fish, a way better fishery. I'll go ahead and admit it's a way better fishery. And I've fished both. Mississippi has more consistent. They're like thick. They're a lot bigger trout. But they're not Texas sized trout, but a 5-pound trout is a good trout here. And I can't even remember how many conversations I had with guys that were, they would walk by, and I know how it is, when you fish yourself and you've caught a bunch of good trout, and I'm standing there, towards the aisle, And these guys would walk up, and I would, introduce myself and talk to them, tell them about Speckled Truth. And I'd be like, "Oh yeah," and they'd be looking at the tank and be like, "Yeah, we got 3 5-pound trout in the tank." And those aren't 5-pounders. That was everybody's first impression. I'd be like, "Oh, sir, well, why don't you walk around here to the back and get a little bit of a closer look?" And they look, and you could tell them dudes never seen a 5-pound trout.
Yeah.
And then you're just kind of like, "Yeah, dude, that's 3 5-pounders." And they look at it, and then they'd be looking and pulling out their phones and being like, "Dude, that's awesome. Like, I've never seen a trout that big." I'm like, "Wow, well, you just said it wasn't a 5-pound trout." I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But in my head, I kind of was. I was laughing in my head. But
yeah, but in perspective, man,
it was a big deal for here, and especially for us to just pull that out of our ass, so to say. I hadn't fished that much before that.
I drove in from Florida.
You just drove in from Florida, and so you took your boat and you went on a different side of the world, I call it, in Mississippi, and I went to my spots, and luckily my last spot produced a good one, which Ed Crum caught.
Mm-hmm.
But just to kind of do that on a whim, it was a really hard thing. It's like a tournament, except that we didn't have as much time as a tournament. We had like a night and half, like a quarter of a day. Like we had the night bite and the morning bite, and that was it. That's all we had to do that. And when we got it done, like, I don't know, man, it took me a couple of days after the boat show and recovering from that, and then like sit back and be like, holy crap, like we did that. Like we actually
pulled
off.
I know.
And it was crazy. It was a pretty cool feeling. That was pretty awesome.
But again, I mean, people just didn't realize the sheer size of that tank. I mean, from front to back was like plus 2 feet. So I mean, those fish, they kind of stuck around to the back on the bottom and just they kind of stayed in that group of 3. And until you got close to that tank and then kind of peered around the corner, that's when you really got a real understanding of how really kind of big these fish were. And so. Last year we did have the live trout. Keith Morrison joined me here in Texas, and we ended up we had a great morning, man. We were going to transport them in from Texas because, again, we wanted to have big trout. You guys, I think, had terrible weather, and we actually had a little weather window. And so we're going to transport them in. But GCRL, Gulf Coast Research Lab, they were supplying the tank, the water, the tank support and everything else. And they just weren't very comfortable bringing in, Texas trout, which I was comfortable with. I know you guys had some hesitation because the last thing I want to do is obviously kill those fish, but we felt like we had a pretty good live well system and everything else, but there was just too much risk there. And I think that was definitely the right decision for sure, but it was still a draw. I mean, what we had, we had a much better booth space. And then not only that, we had a much clearer tank. It was smaller. It was a little bit more intimate. And, people could still kind of see it, but they were still 19 to 21 inch trout. There was 2 or 3 of them in there. But
so just to be clear, the whole like Texas thing, the reason why we didn't do that, there was a couple of deciding factors, but the main thing was that Angelos, the manager of the hatchery, the dude, they grew a 16-pound trout in that hatchery. The guy knows a lot about trout, and his main concern was, taking a fish from Texas and those hypersaline and bringing it here and releasing it. There was like no chance. I mean, it could survive. It could adapt and it could survive, but they didn't. He obviously didn't feel comfortable. With us doing that, and that was really a big deciding factor. But it was great though because we got. It gave us a reason to talk more about the research lab, and the more I've gotten into fishing and trout fishing, the more I get into the science of it, and I really love that as much as fishing itself. And the fact that we got to promote the research lab and everything they do, I think they really go unnoticed. And I know there's research labs in every Gulf state, and they do a lot more than people think. We got to tell people, hey, there's a hatchery where they grow trout and release them every year. And a lot of people that have lived here their whole lives and fished here their whole lives didn't even know that, So it was cool. It definitely it definitely added to the
And
mood.
let me add though too, and it was one extra element there is that these aren't just I mean they're fish that they're growing in the hatchery, but the brood stock that that you guys are, or let me phrase that, the Gulf Coast Research Lab is collecting is actually from Mississippi waters, right? And actually encourages anglers to participate and bring fish to the hatchery for that brood stock, right? So it got fishermen involved in their fishery, which is a much better story than bringing in two big trout from Texas and then potentially having them die. Is that, dude, in your backyard 20 minutes down the road, you have a hatchery that really needs your help. Not that they can't do it, but dude, the more help that they can get, the better. And so if you can support and go out fishing just like you normally would, but instead of filleting them, dude, throw in an ice chest, bring them to the hatchery, they're looking for male trout, they're looking for females, right? And that's only going to better your resource. And so, recently y'all had, it's similar topic, but recently they just released a lot of those fish, right? You were part of that event, right?
Yeah. So every year, before I got on board with CCA Mississippi, Ernie Zimmerman, I mean, he really pushed CCA Mississippi big in the Bay chapter over there, and they started a live catch tournament over there. And when me and Troy Hellwig first became friends, we met through tournament fishing. So it's a little side story, but it's pretty funny. So I knew who Troy was through Facebook and stuff, but I'd never met him. So I knew him and I knew his boat. And so this one year we're fishing, all the trout tournaments that we fish, and I keep seeing them in the same spots that I'm going, and I'm just kind of eventually at this one tournament, the Blind Tiger tournament, me and him are both finishing out the tournament in the same spot. And so me and Troy, we had a lot of similarities that I didn't know at the time, but we like to party. So, we're at the weigh-in, and Troy's feeling good, and I'm feeling good, and I was just kind of like, all right, I gotta go talk to this guy, Until I go up to him, and it's kind of awkward, but I was just like, hey man, are you Troy Hellwig? And instead of just being like, yeah, what do you want or something, he's like, yeah, what's up, man? He's just super friendly, and we started talking, and I was just like. So, we were kind of in the same spot for a while. He goes, yeah, it sucked. I was just like, yeah, it did. But that's how me and Troy became friends. But one of the tournaments that me and him loved to fish the past couple of years after that was that live catch tournament. And so he fishes it one year, and I couldn't go. Work had me hemmed up. I couldn't go. So Troy, what it is you go out and you catch live trout, you bring them in live, and the research lab is there with this trailer that Sport Trail made. And anybody who's had a Sport Trail trailer, just phenomenal trailers are made here in Bay St. Louis. And they made this trailer for the research lab, and it's this huge tank, and they put the trout in there and they transport them back to the lab, and those are used for brood stock. So Troy goes out, and it was funny because, of course, when you can't go, your buddy's just going to kill it.
Of course.
And so Troy, I couldn't go, and he's giving me a play-by-play, of course. and he's just hit the water. And then I get a picture, and it's him holding a trout with topwater. And he's like, third trout on topwater. And I'm like, no way, and I'm just like, he's just messing with me. And then, not even 20, 30 minutes later, he sends me a picture, and he's like, live well's full, I'm done. And I'm like, no way. And so it was open for less than an hour, and he had this skeeter, this little 22-foot skeeter, and it was just 22 or 24, I can't remember, but it was just deathly fast. And Troy just, if there was a chance it would hit 70, he's doing it. And so I just pictured him, because I knew where he was fishing because we had talked about it before the tournament. And I just pictured him just skimming across the bay at 70 miles an hour, just laughing. And he gets back, they had just started the tournament. He's already back with a limit of live trout. So Mississippi limit's 15 inches. So he just smashed it that morning. But it was a tournament that me and him loved fishing, and it's not like it's crazy prizes.
Yeah.
It's cool prizes. Don't get me wrong, but the way it's formatted is not to be competitive. It's just you're there to give back to the fishery. So like every fish you turn in, you get a raffle ticket, and then at the end they draw raffle tickets. So obviously, the more raffle tickets
you can get.
you have in the bucket, the better chance you have of winning things. And so that was something that we did to help the research lab. And the research lab has some really, really good trout fishermen that work there. Yeah. Angelos being one of them. He started that project. That's a long story, but I just learned this from him, and it made me respect him even more than I do. But that project pretty much, got off the ground from him, and it's a really crazy, awesome story. But I'm not going to get deep into that.
But they just had I just saw, I think you were involved with it, being part of CCA and stuff. And I thought I saw some videos and some press coverage, but they actually ended up releasing a bunch of fingerlings back into the fishery.
Yeah, so that was our brood stock that we had turned in. We did 2 live catch tournaments that year, and then also we have anglers, CCA members and not CCA members that got involved with the lab, through us at the boat show. We had that sign up sheet. And they were turning, and Sam Davis being one of them, he would go out, and if he caught a couple keepers, he would just drop them off at the lab in Davis Bayou. And so those trout were from, the brute stock were the ones who created those trout that we released. Awesome. So we released, it was like 135,000. A couple, what was that?
Yeah, it was like last week, 2 weeks ago. It's amazing. And I think that's and hopefully, again, we can help with that, right? With our Speckled Truth booth this year is just getting the word out about how much the Gulf Coast Research Lab is giving back to the community in the trout fishery. And, it fits just straight in line with kind of our mission, and our message is just basically take what you need and release the rest, right? Take care of a resource, conserve it, and do what you can, give back, right? That's, my dad is a great example of that. And we're getting ready to obviously have his podcast, right? And so, but as a guy who's given back to his fishery, that's given him so much. And so I think as either whether you're young or old in his fishery, hopefully you can reflect by maybe this podcast of just how you can potentially give back to your fishery, man. I mean, think about all the great times and the fillets and the fish fries that you've had, but not only that, the memories you've had by catching a big fish or having a certain person on the boat that maybe is no longer there. And that's just encouraging that, man, and getting people back into those programs that give back to something that we all love, that can be there for a long, long time, as opposed to just being so short-sighted and just going to catch and keep whatever the heck we catch that, and I think we just lose sight of that. So, but dude, we're bumping. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
Something cool about that program is, so like, some guys, they go out and even when they're fishing for numbers, I've seen this a lot and I love it. So some guys will turn their live well on, and, the first handful of trout they catch that are keepers, if they only catch 1 or they only catch 5 and they don't feel like, 5 is worth cleaning or 2 are worth cleaning, and they release them. But even though they were going out there intentionally, looking for a limit, like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But the cool thing about this program is, like, say you go out there and do that, like, you go out and you only caught, a handful of fish. Well, if those fish are male, and there's 2 ways to tell if they're a male, and there's the first way is very obvious. It's going to grunt. Only the males are going to grunt. The second way, which I'm not going to do, and probably nobody's going to do, but you pretty much got to jack it off to see if it ejaculates. And I am not going to do that. And it was hilarious hearing Ellen tell us that. Ellen is she works the hatchery, and she's great.
She's awesome.
And she was telling me about that, and it was funny because she was being dead serious. Every dude is perverted, and so she's sitting there talking to me and a couple of guys about it. She's like, "Yeah, so tell it's a male. You grab it right here, and you start pump it right here," and we're all just like dying laughing. But it's scientific, and she's being like dead serious. Yeah. And then she realizes like what she's saying. She's like, "Okay, none of y'all are gonna do that." And she puts the trout back in the tank. We're just like, "No, Ellen, none of us are gonna jack off a trout to see if it's a male. If it grunts, it's a male. If it doesn't grunt, it's not a male."
Oh, that's
but it's cool because if you get involved in this program, and if anybody's interested, we'll link some stuff, I guess. And you can get involved with the research lab, and they really need males more than anything. It's not hard to go out there and get the females, but they need the males more than anything. So say you do go out and you only catch 2 trout, and they're both males, and they're both keeper males, which a 15-inch trout, that's a stud, that's a bull, So you turn those in, not only do you get that self-satisfaction, but it wasn't a wasted trip. Mm-hmm. You just contributed to thousands of trout that are going to be released.
Something Ellen had mentioned, which I had no idea, but it's one male can service 20 females. And so,
yeah, dude.
And so I asked her right at the last one, I'm like, "Hey, Ellen, like what's the what do y'all prefer to have in the hatchery, male to female ratio?" And she's like, "We really prefer 1-to-1. And so the fact that they're at 1-to-20 shows that they need our help, right? And so, yeah, we definitely need to link something down there and get people more involved and just kind of continue to bolster not only what Gulf Coast Research Lab is doing in Mississippi, but really, hopefully, throughout the course of this podcasting venture, we can start talking more about other programs that are across other states, from Georgia to North Carolina or whatever it is, and get people more involved and kind of shed some awareness on that type of stuff. But dude, we are close to time. And so obviously this is the second episode. And I kind of pulled it out of left field with my pops. And he was taking a little, but the idea is that, right? I want you to kind of think on your feet to some extent. These quick hitter questions that kind of close out the show. That way it kind of gives people a little bit more insight to kind of you. So I asked these kind of quick hitter questions. And so the first one I got is, what's your favorite soft plastic?
5-inch wedge tail from Eager Baits.
Any particular color?
Me and Ken have talked a lot. Ken Chamont, the owner, we talked a lot about the 5-inch wedge tail, and it is just such an awesome bait. And so he's gonna make some new colors. So it's pretty much like a salt and pepper. Yeah. It's a black and silver, and it's flashy, and it's just, dude, there's just something about that bait. I have so much confidence in that, and it's because we're talking about big trout, and I know that I throw that 5-inch wedge tail rigged weedless and some flats, and it's so versatile. And that's the other thing that people don't realize about that bait is you rig it weedless, it allows you to fish it in areas you normally couldn't present a very big profile, slow sinking bait. You have to really let that marinate. So when you think about that, I'm talking rocks, rebar, structure. You are able to present a very big profile, very lifelike, just really good bait that those fish probably haven't seen much of, because anybody who tried to throw anything else with treble hooks and bear hooks hanging out, it just gets caught and they lose it.
Yeah.
So, I love that.
I've seen it in action, bro. It really you are a master. Yeah. You the OG of that technique, 100%. And without a doubt, man, I've seen it work, fishing side by side with you, and you just flat out get it done, man, with it. And honestly, I can't wait to get you back over here to Texas, and that way we can fish this winter with you fishing that technique, because I know you're going to throw it, and I'll be standing right next to you probably throwing it as well. But also trying various other techniques to just try to dial in that bite. But, man, you are just dynamite with that thing. And I figured you were going to say that. I did. All right. Favorite topwater?
Oh, you already know. You answer it.
Well, I'd say Mirror Lure He Dog, yeah.
The He Dog, dude. I have so much faith. And they, I got, me and you talked about this a while back. I got my tool shed in the backyard. It's got all my tackle in it. And I got a bunch of lures that I need to replace the hooks and split rings
Mm-hmm.
and clean them up. And I've been talking about doing a live video, and because I distinctly remember when I retired those and what I was catching and when it was. And they're all hanging on a pool noodle. It's a
Yeah,
big pool noodle, and they're all hooked to it. And it's my like, I need to change these hooks, but they've been there for years.
I got you.
I've just kind of bought them and replaced them. But that he dog, man, if I see one anywhere, even if I see one in somebody else's tackle box, I'm stealing it. So if you got a he dog and it's in your tackle box, I'm stealing it. If we went fishing and you're missing a he dog, I took it. And you're not gonna get it
That's
back.
awesome. That's funny, man. All right. So, do you believe in Sulliner or no?
Of course I do.
All right. Let me ask you
100%.
this question: were you always a believer in Sulliner?
No, your dad made me a believer.
Okay.
When we all went down to Port Mansfield and we fished with Mike McBride, and I got to touch on something I brought up earlier about me slow chugging that he dog. So obviously I knew who Mike McBride was, and dude's just a big trout genius. And I'm so thankful for that trip and y'all
Yeah.
inviting me, because that I learned a lot on that trip. And he probably doesn't realize how much he told me, because what he considers probably common knowledge for big trout was like life changing for me. But all the talks that we had while fishing, we were talking about, I was throwing my he dog, and he was, and we were sitting there, and I was throwing it, and it was towards the end of the trip, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, man, that's a great bait." He was like, "I love just slow chugging it. It just works different when you slow
Mm-hmm.
chug it like that." And like, I had the biggest smile on my face, because like that's how I figured out how to work it for me to catch
Yeah.
big trout. And to hear him say that and like solidify that as like, it's true, it works. It wasn't just one of those weird quirks that you think works. It really gave me a lot more faith in that bait. But anyways, on the ride home, me and your dad, we drove from, I picked him up at his house, and we drove from there all the way to Port Mansfield. How long of a drive was that? I don't
That's about
even.
like 12 hours.
Yeah, and I hate long drives, but
Yeah.
your dad's awesome. I love your dad, and it was great. I can't stand long drives, but I didn't mind it with him. We had a lot of really good conversations, and being in the car with somebody like that for that amount of time, you can pretty much get anything you want out of him. Not that your dad won't give you anything you
Yeah.
want out of him, but it was a really cool experience. But anyways, on the way back, me and him, we get to talking more about trout fishing, obviously, and we start talking about the solunar tables and the majors and the minors. And I'd paid a little bit of attention to it. You have told me about it before this, but for some reason, it just kind of went in one ear and out the other. And so this is crazy, and this is 100% a true story. So the story I talked about earlier about, I went out there for like 2 weeks straight, and when I caught my first 5-pound trout, and I didn't understand what made that day
Mm-hmm.
different. And I was looking at the moon, but I wasn't looking at Solunar because I didn't know much about it. So your dad was talking to me, and he was just like, so if you go on tides4fishing.com, you can go back and you can look at days, and you can look and see what the Solunars were that day. So I was just like, he was like, I bet you, and
Yep.
your dad, he's looking at me and he's pointing at me. He's like, I bet you, if you go back and you go back on your Facebook and you look at all those days you posted those big trout, and you know about what time you caught them, it's going to be during a Solunar. And I was like, no
Yeah.
way. I was like, no, there's no way. Dude, I go back and I look on my Facebook, and on that day, the major it was right after it coincided with
Mm-hmm.
sunrise, but when I started getting those bites, it was during the
Yep.
major. You know what I mean? So it coincided with sunrise, but that's why it was such a crazy bite for me, because when it coincides with
Yep.
sunrise or sunset, those are crazy. I don't know when this is airing, but Friday, the majors coincide with sunrise and sunset on Friday. So I'm going on sunrise and sunset
Yeah.
on Friday and looking for big trout. But that whole ride home, dude, I was sitting there and I was going through my Facebook and looking at the big trout I had caught. And then I'm going back on Tides for Fishing and I'm looking at it and it was dead
You're
on.
like, no way.
Literally, dude, it was creepy. Like I couldn't believe it. Like it was dead on because one trout that I caught, it was like a 25 and a half inch. I didn't weigh it, but it was a 25 and a half inch. It was probably over 5 pounds. It was a nice trout. I caught it at 1:30 in the afternoon in July on the south side of Cat Island. And it was on top water in 3 foot of water. And I was just like, that's crazy. Like, why did I catch this fish here? And I go back, what do you know? During the major, right in the middle of the major. And it was like that for all the big fish that I had caught. And it was just, it made me a believer. So now if I'm going to target big trout, you damn right, I'm going to look and I'm going to look and I'm going to fish it, which it doesn't work, 100% of the time. You have to be in the right spot, but it enhances your chances very tremendously.
Well, you're talking about an animal and we're trying to target that with something completely artificial in their environment. And if you think about it, you're not going to be 100% right. But what you're trying to do is like going to Vegas, man. You're just increasing the odds and putting the chips in your favor so you can make educated decisions on when to go, what to throw, and all this other stuff. And it boggles my brain that people just don't believe in Sulliner, that, man, it's a data point. Use the damn data point to make that decision, because I guarantee, and like you said, I mean, geez, we're definitely seeing some correlation with Dirty 30 and Trophy Trout citation with regards to majors, minors, and everything else in Sulliner. And so,
and that was one of the reasons we started the Dirty 30 program. Is there is no, there's all this data on trout, but there's nobody's compiled the data that we're compiling because they why else would you do it other than you just want to know, and I will challenge anybody that's listening to this, because now with Facebook, you do kind of have a log. If you're one of those guys that likes to post when you catch a big fish, if you can remember that day and you can get close to the time that you think you caught it, go on tides4fishing.com. That's the number 4, tides4fishing.com. Go back to that date. And then you look at that date and you scroll down to the bottom and you look at the majors and the minors. And I'm willing to bet you that a lot of those big trout that you caught, if not all of them, are during one of those. So, and when your dad said that to me, I was just like, crazy old Cajun man,
what does he know?
But I kind of thought that, but he's a phenomenal trout fisherman. So I was like, what if he is right? And I start looking, and he was dead on every big trout. And I'm not talking about 2 and 3 pounders, just really nice trout, 5 pound or more. You most likely caught that on a Sulliner, because that's what
crazy. All right, last question, and we'll let you go. A very important question.
I don't know. I'm having fun now. I could do this for another hour.
Well, hey, man, we'll grab a beer afterwards and some whiskey, and we'll just keep talking, bro. But last important question. Haynes or Fruit of a Loom?
Oh, I'm a Haynes man. 100%.
Oh, that's hilarious, bro. Dude, that's funny, man. Well, hey, sincerely, thanks, man, for everything, for being my friend, for being such a phenomenal fisherman, and again, a friend, man, father, and just this is awesome to kind of go forward with you and how many people we're now reaching and impacting and really changing the culture, I think, to some extent, right? And that's the inspiring part about this whole thing, man. So thanks, really, man, from the bottom of my heart, dude, for one, not only being on the podcast, but secondly, just being a part of Speckled Truth. I cannot thank you enough, dude.
Thanks for letting me be a part of it, man. You kind of let just some guy you barely knew tell you how to do things, and they surprisingly worked for some reason, but we're not even nowhere near where we want to be, and that's, things are going to change a lot and they're gonna hopefully get better. Hopefully, the next couple of crazy ideas we have, really boost this thing up to something where we really want it to be. And we have that potential, and I hope people see it and they know that it's a genuine thing, and if you've been around long enough, you're starting to realize that there's not that many genuine things nowadays. So I really I appreciate people that respect the message and they support us. It's crazy, going around now, and I'd say 8 out of 10 times I go to a boat launch, which I don't go to many boat launches anymore because I keep my boat in the water. But before that, when I was launching my boat a lot in various places all over the coast, after that first boat show, there are so many Speckled Truth hats around here.
That's awesome, man.
And it's cool. And I don't and what's the coolest thing about it is, me, Ed, and Keith, it's not that we don't want people to know that we're involved with Speckled Truth, because it is you, man. You are what makes the Speckled Truth, and we're just helping you, get your message out the right way. And it's awesome that when me being as involved as I am in Speckled Truth, and I'm kind of trying to make sure that your message is getting out a certain way, and people have no idea of that, even when they're from around here. And even if they know who I am, they just think I'm like a supporter, and I go up to them and I'm like, hey man, nice hat. And if they know me from social media or whatever, we have a couple conversations. But it's awesome when they don't even know who I am, and we talk, and I'm just like, and if I'm not wearing a Speckled Truth hat, I'm like, hey man, where'd you get that? What's that about? And when they tell me, and the things that they tell me is exactly what we're trying to get across, it's an awesome feeling, dude. It really is. And I'm just kind of like, oh, cool, man. That's cool. I'll buy one, and I walk away, and I'm just like, yes, like, hell yeah, it's working, But
it's humbling, man. It is beyond humbling. Like, seeing seeing that truck going down the highway with the Dirty 30 sticker and a Speckled Truth on I-37 coming from Corpus Christi to San Antonio. I mean, it's just like, holy smokes, man. And I told my wife that the first time that happens, I'm pulling the dude over and I'm taking a picture, and I did. And he thought it was crazy. But on the same token is we talked for a while, and he appreciates and supports kind of what we're doing. And that's what it is, dude. It's people. Like, yeah, we're kind of leading this thing to some extent, but really it's the people that don't really maybe realize, but it's the community they're a part of, and they're helping build that message. And so everyone listening, you are a part of that message, and you're building that brand. So thank you. Anyway, man, time's getting long. I apologize, man, from keeping you from your family for so long, brother, but thank you so much for being on, bud.
Thank you, man. I enjoyed it.
Hey, everyone. I just want to say thanks again for joining us here at the Speckled Truth podcast. Regardless of fishery and where you're joining us from, we really appreciate your followership and just tuning in tonight to listen to the stories that make their pursuit of trophy trout so special. And so, again, none of this happens without the support of our sponsors from Mirror Lure, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky. Without your support, none of this is possible. So thanks again to them. We hope to see you next time here at the Speckled Truth podcast. And we always want to leave you with this one tidbit. Always remember to take what you need and release the rest. God bless.